Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us. I will give a few minutes for more folks to join us today, but if you would like, please put your name and your organization in the chat so that we have a introduction and record of everyone who attended today. If you're just joining us, we're just giving a couple more minutes for the last folks to start trickling in here. If you could introduce yourself, name and organization in the chat, we'd be really grateful. Otherwise, we'll get started in just one more minute, probably. All right, thanks everyone. I'll go ahead and get us started then. Um, Well, good afternoon, and thanks so much for joining us today for our last quarterly Homeownership Development Partner Call of 2025. These quarterly meetings are typically for us to share news and updates about our programs, resources, and other information, as well as to collect feedback from you on certain items that we're addressing on our side. I'm Jessica McKinnon. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Senior Homeownership Development Program Analyst at OHCS. My role here is to run our homeownership development funding programs and our NOFA. Like the last couple of years, I am taking this meeting over to talk about next year's NOFA. So just a little bit of housekeeping. This meeting will be recorded and posted to our website. Please stay on mute while others are speaking, but feel free to enter questions and thoughts into the chat at any time. We'll pause a few times for questions and feedback, and we do ask that you please raise your virtual hand if you'd like to speak. Today, I'll start with a really brief summary of LIFT in case we have any new partners today who are unfamiliar with the program. I'll move into the timeline for 2026 and 2027, which will include a breakdown of how the new biennial multi-step application process will work. And then I'd like to dig into the specifics on the concept proposal and due diligence stages of the application, including our scoring criteria. Finally, we have a few additional changes to talk about at the end. So let's move on to talk about LIFT. LIFT stands for Local Innovation and Fast Track. It's a program funded by Article 11Q capital bonds, which are typically for more infrastructure-related costs, but LIFT is a pathway that lets us use them for housing development under certain very specific circumstances. It can be a little complicated to work with because of this, but it is our most consistent funding source for homeownership development and has continued to grow since its creation. To be eligible for LIFT homeownership, you need to be an eligible covenant holder, which is defined in statute and summarized on this slide. We can provide funding to a public body like a city or school, an agency of the US government, a nonprofit organization, co-ops, and federally recognized tribes. Our program supports new construction of affordable homes for sale, conversion of non-housing structures into for-sale homes, and new manufactured home parks. The other key requirement to be eligible for LIFT is that you have to use a shared equity model like a community land trust or co-op. This means that your home buyers will own the structure and you or another eligible covenant holder will need to own the land. And if you're not interested in the long-term management of the land, you can partner with an existing CLT to take on the ownership and management of the project after it's been built. Other requirements are that we can only fund homes up to 80% AMI. We can only reimburse costs that can be capitalized, which is most of your costs, but not all of them. And you can't have started vertical construction yet. The amount of lift that you'll be eligible for depends on your project. We provide a per unit subsidy based on the number of bedrooms in each home. The smallest studio homes can receive $165,000 and the award goes up for each additional bedroom. Rural developments can be eligible for an additional $5,000 per unit, up to a total extra $100,000. Please note that this is the maximum award. We will fully evaluate your pro forma and will determine the actual amount based on your need. We also do require that you have at least one additional source of funds to cover expenses that LIFT can't. Now, from this point forward, everything I'll share will be new beginning next year. This is where we are now. It may potentially change a bit, and all of this will be subject to Housing Stability Council approval as well. Our LIFT offering always includes some set-asides to ensure that our program is serving a diverse range of applicants, projects, and geographies. Next year, we'll have one special combined set-aside for small and emerging developers, culturally specific organizations, and counties that have been underserved by LIFT. More specific definitions are here in the NOFA, or they'll be in the NOFA, but a summary of those definitions are here on the slide, as well as a list of counties that are currently underserved. 40% of our funds, or about $15 million per year, will be set aside for organizations meeting one or more of these definitions. The remaining 60%, or about $22.5 million per year, will be available to all other applicants. And please note that these numbers do not include the separate factory produced set aside that Talia will introduce a little later. We'll be implementing some new caps this year based on the total LIFT request across all applications that you'll submit for the whole biennium. This means that you can submit multiple smaller applications or an application much larger than previously allowed. We have 3 tiers based on your experience level. Our highest tier is for experienced developers who have completed at least one LIFT homeownership project, meets a minimum threshold for experience and capacity, and has had no major leadership changes in the last 2 years. And I want to note an edit to this tier if you attended our September presentation. Previously, we said that you needed to complete a LIFT project of a similar size to what you're applying for, but that's changed. While you do need to have completed a project of similar size, it does not need to be your LIFT project. And this tier will have a biennial cap of $16 million. The second tier is an experienced developer. You do not need to have a completed LIFT project, and it's okay if you've had a leadership change, but you do need to meet the other requirements. You may also meet the requirements for this tier if you hire an experienced development consultant that will work with you through the full development process. This tier will have a biennial cap of $14 million. And then all other developers will fall into the third tier with a $10 million cap for the biennium. Last month, this conversation prompted the question of what counts as a major leadership change. This turned out to be a surprisingly complicated question given the varying sizes of the organizations we partner with. So this is what we have for you. If you meet the definition of a small organization, ignoring our 15 unit per year application cap, then we would consider a major leadership change to be a change in any one executive leadership role, turnover of more than 50% of the board of directors, or turnover of the board president if there is no CEO or executive director. For all other organizations, a major leadership change would be turnover in more than one executive leadership role or turnover of the CEO or executive director. For both sizes of organizations, if any leadership change was abrupt and unplanned due to resignation, termination, misconduct, or financial mismanagement, we will automatically consider that to be significant. And now I'll go ahead and pause here and see if there's any questions about LIFT in general or any thoughts on the set-asides and biennial caps. Sure, go ahead, Catherine.
I was wondering on the experience, does it have to be another homeownership project if you're a developer that hasn't used Lyft, or can it just be a rental or even student housing?
That's a good question. Talia, have we thought about that level of detail on this definition? We might need to get back to you.
Okay. Yeah, let's get back to you. My hunch is that I think either will work, but we need to make it, we'll make an internal decision.
Okay.
Great. Any other questions or thoughts? All right, I don't see any hands, so I will keep going. And actually, at this point, I'll hand things over to Talia to talk about the Factory Produced Housing Initiative.
Great. So this might be a little bit of a repeat from last time, but many of you know we have 25 million in LIFT homeownership funds and also 25 million in LIFT rental funds reserved for a factory produced housing set aside. Together, the rental and homeownership division will fund a collective 25 million. So it's not a collective 50 million. We just have it reserved because we don't know what the makeup of the projects will be. The legislation HB 3145 has mandated that we fund 5 factory produced housing projects. That doesn't mean we will only fund 5 factory produced housing projects. And we are convening next month. We'll kick off an advisory committee that's going to come up with some selection criteria for these 5 projects. The committee is a mix of agency staff and subject matter experts. Maybe some of you on the call are going to be part of that committee. And basically, they'll be telling us what our priorities should be in this composition of projects. So anybody interested, please follow all the directions that Jessica is talking about in the presentation today. You'll still go through all our regular LIFT NOFA process, but the only difference is that in Q1 of 2026, we'll launch an intake that will give you kind of like the green ticket for this set aside funds. So the intake will apply the selection criteria from the advisory committee. It will be pretty low effort. It won't be as involved as filling out the LIFT application. It will just tell us different components of the project so we can figure out how we prioritize and select projects. And so you'll fill out this intake form. You'll also, given the timing, simultaneously be applying for LIFT, which again is a first come, first serve. So don't let anything about the FPH process hold you up in applying for LIFT. And then once the intake closes, we'll select the 5 projects and likely 2 alternates. And then you'll keep going through the LIFT NOFA or the ORCA if it's a rental project. And if you make it successfully through, then you'll be accessing this set aside funding. And I got a question yesterday, does this set aside funding count as part of your cap? The organizational cap? Yes, it does. And then also, you could not be chosen for the set aside, but you could you could still be funded through LIFT if your project makes it through LIFT. Um, so yeah, I'll stop there, but happy to answer any questions about that.
All right. I don't see any questions, so I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. Um, We've shared before that next year we'll be piloting a revolving pre-development loan program. We're hoping to be able to offer around 10 loans of up to $50,000 to cover pre-development expenses, especially those required for our own due diligence requirements. This isn't a separate application, but we may have just a couple additional questions for you. They will be first come, first served and available to rural, emerging, small, and culturally specific applicants. The loan will have a 24-month term and will be due either when you reach financial close of the project or by the end of the term if you don't reach financial close. The loan is 0% interest for the first 12 months and 3% for the remainder. The way we see this working is that you'll receive this loan before needing to do all your due diligence work. You'll be able to close on it quickly and use the funds to pay for those expenses. And then when due diligence is done and you close on your LIFT loan, you'll be able to use LIFT to repay this pre-development loan. You should be able to close LIFT within a year, so there shouldn't actually be any interest costs. But if there are any major delays or something happens and you're unable to close on LIFT, you'll still have another year to reach that closing or apply for LIFT again. You'll just be charged that small interest rate because we weren't able to revolve that loan into the next project. One other flag here, you'll notice throughout this presentation today that there will be certain lines or words highlighted in red. This is to represent changes from the last time this information was presented. So here we did learn that we need to charge something for this loan at the closing. So there will be a $1,000 closing charge for recipients of this program. And then the last program I'll introduce now is the Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit, or OAHTC. This program has a very limited offering for homeownership development. Essentially, we provide tax credits to lenders who will offer lower interest rates for permanent loans up to a 4% decrease. Not a lot of homeownership development types use permanent loans, so this program is specifically limited to limited equity co-ops and manufactured home parks. These developments can apply for OAHTC with their LIFT application or as a standalone application without LIFT. Last year, manufactured home parks applying for just OAHTC needed to apply for the ORCA. This year will be different. All manufactured home parks interested in OAHTC should apply through our NOFA, as well as all limited equity co-ops. And are there any questions about, we can go back to the factory produced housing program or the pre-development loan or OAHTC? I said questions. Comments and feedback are welcome as well. All right. Then I'll go ahead and move on to the next section, which is our NOFA timeline. So this year we're making two major changes to our NOFA process. The first is that we're switching to a biennial NOFA. This will work like two separate but identical NOFAs, but it allows us to find more places to reduce the administrative burden for everyone and for us to update policies that offer more flexibility. The second change is that we're switching to a multi-step application process. This means that you'll have less work to secure your place in line and then have a longer timeline to do the more time-consuming work so that you don't feel rushed to get things done. So here's what we're planning for the biennial NOFA. In January of 2026, we'll launch the first half of our funds, which we'll call the 2026 funding. This round of funds will only be available for applicants who will be able to close on their project before February 2027. This will work like the normal NOFA, and funds will be awarded on a first come, first served basis. At this time, we'll also accept early applications for projects closing after February 2027, but we'll just hold on to those until we launch the 2027 funds. In September of 2026, we'll launch the 2027 funds. If you completed your application but were not selected for funding in the first round, we'll automatically roll you over as day one applicants. So this works for both 2026 projects that didn't receive funds and 2027 projects that submitted their application early. This round is technically first come, first served, but we anticipate that in practice, this will result in a large tiebreaker between those day one applicants. So we've adjusted our tie-breaking criteria to better manage this process. We see the new biennial process working hand in hand with our new multi-step process, which I have pictured here. We'll start with intake, which will just be an online form similar to what used to be our pre-application. We'll collect basic project information that'll let us do a surface level check for eligibility. We'll process these on a first come, first served basis, and eligible projects will be invited to Procorum, which is our online tool for application and developments, or application and document submission. Here, you'll be able to submit your concept proposal. This is about 30 to 50% of the application and will focus mostly on your experience, capacity, site suitability, and readiness. This will be first come, first served, and will secure your spot in line. At this point, you can stop until you hear from us. If there is funding available for your project, we'll reach out and invite you to complete due diligence. If there's not funding available, you don't have to do anything else. Due diligence will be the remainder of the application, as well as what used to be our due diligence process that came after reservation of funds. There will be more requirements in this stage, but you'll also have considerably more time to complete them. And then once you complete due diligence, you'll be referred to Housing Stability Council for approval. Will issue your formal reservation of funds, and you can complete the closing process. So this is a good graphic for projects that progress normally, but what happens if you don't get selected for funds? Let's say that you're a 2026 project that submitted your concept proposal, but we ran out of funds, so you weren't invited to due diligence. You don't have to do anything. In September of 2026, when we release those 2027 funds, your project will automatically be considered in the tiebreaker with no action from you. If you're selected for funds at this point, you'll be invited to complete due diligence as a 2027 project. If not, again, no further action will be necessary. Then once you complete your due diligence, you'll also move into reservation and closing. Alternatively, if you're a 2027 project that submitted your concept proposal early in 2026, note that you'll never have secured a spot in line because you weren't eligible for the 2026 funds, but you really haven't had to do any work since you clicked the submit button. You will also be rolled over into that day one tiebreaker with no action on your part. Then same as the other projects, if you're invited to due diligence, you can complete that and move on to reservation and closing. And this is new. I've presented it a couple of times now, but just wanted to pause one more time and see if there are any thoughts or questions about the biennial or multi-step process. All right.
This is Sarah at Habitat Portland. So am I correct that half of the funding will be reserved for 2027, even if there's like, it could be fully utilized given the rush of 2026 applications?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. sure, Catherine.
Is there, in the intake process, is there going to be any disqualifiers for the intake? Because it sounds like kind of anybody can just go ahead and fill out an intake and be in the queue.
Yes. So the only disqualifiers are going to be those major eligibility requirements. So if you submit and you are not an eligible covenant holder, we'll reach out and let you know that you're not eligible for the program. We'll also make sure that you're using a shared equity model and those other like, really, are you eligible for this program questions before you really put in a lot of work to the application.
Okay, so there you will be using the big thresholds to say, hey, no, you can't do this because of XYZ. That makes sense. But there's no
Yes.
other like specifics on this isn't, something that I think I get it. Yeah, that it's really just the big items that would be disqualifiers.
Yes, it's really just a screening tool to make sure that you're really eligible for the program in general.
Yep.
Go ahead, Scott.
Thanks, Jessica. I might have missed this, but on the first come, first serve timing, is it that the application opens and we do that intake and then we're invited to Procorum? Or is the intake more like the pre-app that occurred in the past?
Yeah, the intake is like the pre-app. So that'll be our trigger to give you an invite to Procorum. And then your first come, first serve will be, or the first come, first serve for the funding will be your submission in Procorum. The first come, first serve for the intake is just how we'll process you through the system. Just essentially first come, first serve as we set up your Procorum work centers, so they won't all go out at the same time.
Thanks.
Mhm. Any other questions before I move on?
Jessica, there's one in the chat. It says, it sounds like this is more like the rental orca process. Still sounds like there will be funds available annually, but is it that no new applications in 2027? There are no new applications in 2027. Maybe your next slides will show this.
My next slides will show it, but maybe less than a specific answer to the question. So we're trying to adopt some of ORCA's best practices, but we know that the ORCA in general isn't going to work for the way homeownership development projects work. So yes, it's a little bit like an ORCA process, but it is annual. So we'll have this multi-step annual process, but it's not going to be you complete this and get your name on a waiting list and just are there until funding comes available for you. It'll still be that annual process. So there will be 2027 applications. And then, yeah, my next slide should get into the timeline a little bit more. So I'll go ahead and move on. And then if you still have questions after the timelines, feel free to put those in the chat as well. Let's see. So really quickly, I just wanted to share that we have settled on specific dates for the timeline. Of course, when the NOFA comes out, we'll have all of these dates published for you there. The month of January will focus on trainings. Essentially, every Thursday in January, except for New Year's Day, we'll host a different training session. And this slide is a rough plan of those trainings, but the final determination will be released through a technical advisory. And then the key date here, though, is that we'll launch the NOFA on January 26th. If you're applying for a 2026 project, this is what your timeline will look like. We'll begin intake on January 26th, which is the same day that we launched the NOFA. We'll need a little time to ensure that everyone gets access to Procorum and has a fair start, so we won't start accepting concept proposals until February 9th. You can submit your concept proposal at any time, but on May 3rd, we'll cut off proposals for 2026 applicants. You're absolutely still welcome to submit, but just anything after that date, we'll consider a 2027 application. This is just to make sure that you have enough time to complete due diligence before our deadline. And then that deadline for due diligence will be November 3rd, 2026, and then you'll need to close on your lift loan by February 26th of 2027. If you attended last month's session, we talked about how you needed to commit to a specific closing date. We're no longer going to go into that amount of detail. Instead, we'll just need you to commit to these posted deadlines, regardless of your specific project timeline. And then, of course, you can close earlier if you move quickly through the process. If you're a 2027 project, this is what your timeline will look like. You have the same start date. Intake will be accepted starting January 26th, 2026, and we'll start accepting concept proposals on February 9th. You can submit your concept proposal at any time after this, but if you want it considered for that day one tiebreaker, you'll need to submit before we actually release those funds on September 21st. If there are still funds available after we do the tiebreaker, we'll continue accepting concept proposals until April 15th, 2027. But we're anticipating being oversubscribed, so I would recommend getting your application in before that day one. Then on April 15th, we'll also merge the two set-aside categories if any funding remains in that special set-aside. This means that if you're a general applicant and we haven't used all of the funds for our special set-aside because we didn't get enough applications, then that funding may come available for you at this point. Then for 2027 projects, the final deadline to complete due diligence is September 2nd, 2027, and the final deadline to close on your loan is December 17th, 2027. And are there any questions on the actual dates or the timelines? And did that answer fully answer the question in the chat?
Jessica, can you just go back one slide? I want to make sure I confirmed Sarah's question. Yeah, so final close deadline is February 26th, so you don't need to commit to a specific closing date other than that's the drop dead closing deadline. And if you're not able to meet it, we'll give the funds to someone else.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks for monitoring the chat, Talia. I appreciate it. All right, I'm seeing no other questions. I will go ahead and move on. Next, I'll dive into our new, more specific content on the concept proposal and due diligence stages of the process, starting with the concept proposal. So this slide shows the documents that you'll need to submit to secure your place in line. This is it. Maybe give or take one or two documents as we finalize everything before launch, but this little one slide list is basically everything. And that's not to say that all of the documents are easy, but I'm excited to see that it's a very far cry from the dozens of documents that have been part of the full application in the past. So most of the documents at this stage are provided by us. We'll have an Excel workbook for you to fill out with details on your project, your development team, your development timeline, your pipeline, and some additional information. We're also adding a separate experience and stewardship workbook, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And then our site review checklist, which if you're not familiar with it, is a long document going over site feasibility. The authorization and acceptance form, DEI agreement, and CSO attestation forms are all pretty simple documents that you read and sign. And then we'll also want you to pay the application charge at this stage. From your own documents, we'll be looking for your 2 most recent years of financial statements, your organizational documents like your bylaws and articles of incorporation, evidence that you've registered with the Oregon Secretary of State, and then evidence of site control and your preliminary site plan. Then using that list, we'll be able to evaluate 4 of our minimum standard scoring categories. We'll have capacity to complete the proposed project on our required timeframe, experience to complete a project of the proposed size, experience and knowledge for the long-term stewardship of the proposed project, and then we'll ask you very limited narrative questions for the categories we'll score during the due diligence phase, just to make sure that you're on track, which we're calling your concept summaries. Now, I don't have the points or weights for you on any of these until the NOFA actually launches, because these do need to get DOJ feedback and they change sometimes as we actually build the application, but I can tell you what we'll be looking at. Our capacity scoring will basically be the exact same as last year, so I won't go into too much detail. Essentially, we review your development pipeline and your development history and make sure that you're not biting off more than you can chew. We'll also assess your staff just to make sure one person isn't overburdened by work. You can also review last year's NOFA scoring document, which I will ask Talia to please link in the chat shortly. And you can review that document to understand this and other categories a little bit further. Experience will also be mostly similar to last year. We'll look at your history of development as an applicant and the developer's history of development if they're a separate entity. We'll review your staff experience as well as any consultants that'll support your project, your history of turnover and promotions, and new this year, any continuing education that you've supported. What this question will look like is still to be determined, but we do plan on adding that education component. The last item that we have here is any formal and meaningful partnerships that you have to support the project, which must be supported by an MOU. Next year, we'll also be removing the additional half points we used to have for receiving a PDCB grant or for this being a later phase of another project supported by LIFT, as we're including some of that elsewhere. For stewardship, we'll focus on 2 big questions. What is your experience in working with your shared equity model? And have you adopted good or best practices for the long-term management of your portfolio? To the first question, we'll look at the number of homes in your portfolio, your staff experience, and any continuing education that you've taken about CLTs or whichever shared equity model you choose. This is new this year and will replace a larger narrative question on experience. In this section, we'll also ask about your resale formula, the status of your ground lease, and how you plan to inform home buyers about your shared equity model. The second question will assess your planned software systems, compliance monitoring, and home sale processes, as well as how you've planned to ensure that you have the capacity to maintain your ground leases. If you're using a partner CLT, you can have them fill this section out for you. And then also one of the things that we're working to change next year is to reduce the narratives in this section and add more multiple choice questions and short answer questions, just to reduce that time commitment. Concept summaries will be just a few small narrative questions that we'll use to guide our technical assistants going into your project. These may change as we finalize the application, but right now we're looking at these 3 questions. First is just an elevator pitch for your project. Second is a summary of how you or your project will further equity. And then third is a summary of your financial strategy and risk mitigation. And hopefully these will be really brief and simple questions. And last month, we did ask you all about your thoughts for switching to a certification standard for some of these minimum standards. We did look into this. I planned out like a whole draft strategy, but when we workshopped it internally, it actually wound up making everything a lot more complicated and confusing, and did not have the effect that I hoped for it to have. So instead of having a certification standard, we're going to separate out some experience and stewardship questions into their own form. And then this form can be uploaded to your partner portal, which means that you'll only have to complete it once for multiple applications this year, applications moving into next year and into the future. And then we're also going to standardize that form so that if you do need to update it, like say your staff changes, you should just be able to download the copy from Procorum, make an update, and re-upload it. Also, if you are a third-party developer who works on multiple projects or a CLT that partners with other builders to take on homes after they're built, we can set up a partner portal just for you to include these forms so that you're not having to fill them out multiple times for multiple partners. Now, assuming, oh, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, are the CLTs, if they're partnering with other, developers, are they limited in the number of deals that they can do based on that threshold limit, the 14 million or 16 million?
Good question. And no, so just the developer or whoever receives the recipient of the lift loan, basically the responsible party, is going to be the one responsible. So in the case of a CLT taking over from the developer after construction, there's kind of two different ways that we've seen. One is if the developer is an eligible covenant holder, they'll be the lift recipient and they'll build the homes. And then after all the homes are built, they'll transfer the land and the responsibility for the lift loan to the CLT after construction. And in that case, the CLT doesn't really have any commitment, so they don't need to worry about the max. But in some cases, maybe the developer is a for-profit organization, so they're not eligible for lift. So they'll partner with a CLT to be the applicant who will pass through. In that case, that will contribute to that 16 million max.
Okay.
All right. And great question. Thank you. Now, assuming that you submit everything and meet our minimum standards, you'll secure your place in line. If anything's missing, you'll have a brief cure period to submit any missing documents or make any needed updates. Once you have your place in line, we'll check to see if there's any funding available for your project that we can hold for you. If there is, then you'll be invited to complete the due diligence stage of the application. If there are funds, but there's not enough, or if you're next in line to receive funding up to a certain amount, we might select you as an alternate. And as an alternate, you'll be invited to complete due diligence in advance. And as funds come available, we may allocate them to your project. As an alternate, you'll also receive priority for the next round of LIFT funding, assuming that LIFT is funded in general. If there are no funds available and you're not selected as an alternate, this is where you stop and you don't need to do anything else. And there may be times throughout the NOFA where more funding comes in or held funding is released. Some examples are projects in due diligence needing to withdraw or reduce the amount of the lift ask, the factory produced set aside ending and the funds coming back to us, and the projects that have been funded by LIFT in the past needing to return some of their funds. If funds come back, we'll follow the process listed here. First, those funds will be portioned into our set-asides according to the percentage. Next, those funds will be allocated to our alternates. If there are funds remaining after fully funding the alternates, what we do next depends on the time of year that those funds come in. First, if we're still accepting concept proposals for that year, we'll select the project that's next in line. If we've moved on to accepting concept proposals for the next year or are no longer accepting concept proposals, then we'll hold those funds and release them with the next release of funds. So like the 2026 moving into the 2027 funds, or if it's late 2027, we'll hold them for 2028 NOFA. If more than one application are submitted on the same day, their position in line will be determined by a detailed and objective tiebreaker. This will just be a form that you fill out as part of your application that'll auto-calculate your score based on your project. I shared the general criteria and their weights last month, but we've built out a draft rubric here. You may notice a couple of items have different weights now as we built out and trialed the scores. So our highest two priority items are how much of the funds you're eligible for that you're requesting and the wildfire impact areas. The first is tiered by the actual percentage of funds, and then the second will have two tiers based on if you're just building in a wildfire impacted area or if you're building and have adopted strategies to ensure wildfire survivors are able to purchase the homes. Then we have a lot of medium weight categories. The first is if you've received other state or local government resources with the most points earned by their award, covering 15% of the affordable funding gap, and then the lower not having that minimum funding requirement. 6 points will be awarded if this is a later phase of a previous LIFT funded project, and 6 if this is your only submission for the biennium. The last medium weight item is based on a formula we've developed called the weighted bedroom score. So the formula is up here. Essentially, it's just a number calculated by giving points to each unit based on the number of bedrooms and then dividing it by the total number of units. This math will be done automatically in your worksheet. A higher score gets you more points in the tiebreaker, and then regardless of weighted bedroom score, you can earn another 2 points if more than 10% of your project is 4 or more bedroom homes. Moving on to our lower priority items, we'll score on your accessibility based on the percentage of fully accessible units and visitability of your units and sites. Energy efficiency will get points for net zero or passive house construction, or fewer points if you build to another standard, as well as 1 point if you include solar panels. 4 points if more than 25% of units are reserved for 60% AMI households, or 2 points for 10 to 25% set aside. For fire-resistant build materials, we've composed a list of fire-smart building standards, and you'll receive points based on how many of them will be included in your development. For sustainable build materials, points will be awarded based on the percentage of your hard costs being sustainable materials, and then any rural projects will receive an additional 4 points. Big note here, we will not be able to provide one-on-one technical assistance for anything on this tiebreaker. So if you have questions, they'll need to be addressed by us in the FAQ. Because the 2027 funding release will likely result in a very large tiebreaker, we want to ensure that we avoid any risk of favoring or providing additional help to any one project. So you'll have to do this part on your own, but the form that you fill out will do all of the scoring and calculations for you. So hopefully it should be a pretty easy task. If in a worst case scenario, there is a tie in the tie-breaking score and we can only pick one of the projects, we do have a tiebreaker for the tiebreaker. First, the funds we have can support, or if the funds we have can support one project but not the other, we'll pick the project we support or we can support. For example, say we have $2 million and the tie is between a $2 million project and a $5 million project, we'll select the $2 million project. If both of the projects are $2 million and we could fully fund either, then we'll select the project with the greatest number of units. If both projects have the same number of units, we'll fund the project that provides the greatest geographic equity. If both projects are also in the same geography, we'll select the project with the highest weighted bedroom score. If we only have $2 million and the projects are both higher than that, like 3 million and 5 million, we'll first select the one that we can fund the most units. This is only for a substantial difference, like if one project is only requesting 80% of the funds and the other's requesting 100, we'd see a substantial difference there. Otherwise, we'll just select the project that we can fund the greater percentage of. Excuse me. So in my earlier example, that would mean funding the $3 million project over the $5 million project. At that point, we'll do greatest geographic diversity followed by the highest weighted bedroom score. And then if somehow by all the worst luck there is still a tie, I don't really know. I might make you play rock, paper, scissors, but really hopefully this will be enough. Any questions about the tie-breaking rubric or any of the other information since the last question round?
Jessica, there's a question from Amy. Will you offer larger projects the opportunity to phase again this year? And I can answer since you're taking a sip of water. I think we, in the survey that we did to a lot of, or we sent out a survey to this network, and the responses that we heard were that people were not a fan of the phasing or not getting the full amount. So our goal this year is to fund full projects. I think if we're, yeah, I'll let you finish from there, Jessica.
Yeah, thanks so much, Talia. We are looking to adopt another practice from the ORCA, which allows them to have some some minimal flexibility between their set-asides and their ability to forward allocate from future years. I think we're going to give ourselves a little bit of wiggle room if we need to, just to help us finish out a single project, if that's possible. But aside from that, really, we're going to rely on that alternate system. So like if your project can only be half funded, then you'll be listed as an alternate. And we won't, I guess in the case that your project isn't funded, we could work with you to figure out the best process. But ultimately, the intent of you being selected as an alternate is that so long as LIFT continues to be funded, we'll end up fully funding your project by the end of the next year. Any other questions? Is that a good answer for Amy? All right. Great. Then I'll go ahead and move on to the due diligence part of this presentation. As a reminder, if your concept proposal meets our standards and we've identified funding available for you, then you'll be invited to complete this due diligence process. When you move on to this stage, you'll be connected to one of our wonderful development officers, either Susie Sandstrom or Elizabeth Thomas. They'll be able to provide significant one-on-one support and help walk you through this full process. If you're receiving a pre-development loan or will also be applying for OEHTC, you'll also be connected with our lovely program analyst, Tasha Worth, who will be able to provide support on those processes. One of the requirements during the due diligence period is that you need to make regular progress so that we're sure that you'll be able to meet the deadline. So to assess that and to provide the best support that we can, we've broken the due diligence requirements into 3 stages. The first stage, tasks and documents, will be due 2 months after you were invited to complete due diligence. And this is a soft deadline. While we do expect you to complete most of the tasks by this date, we're not going to take your funding away if 1 or 2 of these tasks are behind, as long as you keep your development officer updated. If you get significantly behind, though, that's when we may consider releasing our hold on your funds and moving on to another project. So stage 1 is going to focus on tasks and documents related to your concept proposal, as well as the remainder of our minimum standards scoring. So you'll want to schedule a kickoff meeting with your development officer during this time. You'll need to fill out a form acknowledging the deadline for your project, have your city or county fill out our evidence of zoning form, and then complete our project narratives and a rough draft of your pro forma. In addition to that, you'll need to submit resumes for the staff listed in your experience and capacity sections, any MOUs or contracts for partners or consultants listed in your concept proposal. And if there was a tiebreaker, we may ask you for evidence for something you listed, but what that'll look like will be determined on a case-by-case basis. Stage 2 will focus on items that have a lower barrier to completion, as well as items that may trigger issues or the need for more work. These will be due within 4 months of receiving your invitation to due diligence, and this is another soft deadline. At this stage, we'll need you to pay your recipient charge, as that's meant to cover Elizabeth and Susie's time with your project. If you were selected for the pre-development loan, we'll need you to have closed on it by this point. And then around this time, we'd also like you to plan out a key stakeholder meeting with us and your other funders so that we can make sure that we're all on the same page for requirements and timing. We'll need you to submit flood and wetlands maps, have BOLI complete a prevailing wage determination, and have your phase 1 environmental study and preliminary title report pulled. This should allow time for follow-up studies, project changes, and other updates if any of these reports come back with issues. Stage 3 is kind of the everything else stage, but we tried to keep the highest barrier items here to save costs and allow for more time to complete them. These will all be due by the final due diligence deadline. And this one's a hard deadline. There's no flexibility. If you're not done with all of the tasks by this deadline, we won't be able to move forward with your project. So what's required at this stage? For tasks, we'll want you to preview our loan document templates and make sure any lenders or other funders are on board with our requirements. Also, we don't require a permit to close on Lyft, but if one of your other funders does, we will want you to submit your permit application by this point. We'll want you to complete your final fully balanced pro forma by this stage, and an operating budget if you'll have shared resources and maintenance. And that's a new document that we'll be designing. Then, if you are applying for OEHTC, you'll need to submit your application for that by this stage as well. Tying back to the pro forma, we'll want final evidence of your costs at this stage, as well as evidence of commitments or commitments of all of your funding sources for the project. We'll want to see an appraisal justifying the value of the lift and construction loan. We did hear from some partners that they don't typically pull an appraisal until right before they close. We may be able to provide a waiver under certain circumstances, but in general, we'll encourage our partners to still complete the appraisal at this stage. We'll want your elevation drawings, a draft of your ground lease, and fair housing resolution. You'll need to select a general contractor by this point and provide proof that they can legally conduct business in Oregon. And then we have a few more items that may be due in specific circumstances. We'll review the 3 remaining minimum standards during likely stage 1 of due diligence. This includes evaluating your project details to ensure that your project is of good quality and desirability, equity and community engagement practices that demonstrate service to and inclusion of populations underrepresented as homeowners, and an analysis of your final viability and your financial viability and risk mitigation. For project details, you'll actually have already completed most of the work. Your project narrative, access to amenities, and many other basic project questions will have all been submitted with your concept proposal and tiebreaker form. Mainly, we'll be adding in your narratives that'll explore services and features provided in your community and any innovations in your build. This will remain largely the same or similar to previous years, with some minor modifications based on the new tie-breaking criteria. For equity and community engagement, the first thing we'll ask you to do is identify a focus community that's underrepresented in homeownership and tell us about their needs. This section then focuses on 3 types of equity that can include your focus community. Organizational equity will look at how you embed equity and your focus community into your internal operations. This new question will replace a couple others that we have asked about your organization and policies in the past. Procedural equity will assess how you've engaged with your community in the selection and design of your project. And then distributional equity will look at your MWESB practices and how you market and sell homes, home buyer selection and support, how well you serve your focus community, and homes set aside for households earning 60% AMI. The scoring criteria for this section won't change much, but you may notice that we'll reword the questions or split them apart into shorter narratives. or some multiple choice questions. Financial viability will probably change some even from what I'm presenting here today. Since we're requiring the full pro forma by closing, our previous scoring criteria doesn't quite work anymore. So we'll still do a full evaluation of your pro forma, making sure everything's balanced, sources are committed, and costs are justified. We'll compare your per unit costs with our recent projects to make sure you're in line with what we expect, and we'll make sure your hard and soft costs are well supported and reasonable. We'll also ask a few narratives to ensure that there's a sufficient market for your homes, that you've implemented some cost containment measures, that you've identified risks, and that you have a plan for addressing cost overruns if they occur. Separately from our scoring, we may provide the option for you to provide some additional risk mitigation if you don't meet one of our minimum standards, if we consider your organization or project high risk, or if there are any other yellow flags. These measures could be providing a guarantor or performance bond for the lift loan, a guarantor for the construction loan, signing legal documents allowing for recourse on your assets, or maintaining a certain amount of liquidity. OHCS will decide which risk mitigation measures work for the identified risk. Once you finish your due diligence, we'll recommend your project to Housing Stability Council for approval. Once approved, we'll send you the formal reservation of funds and get you through to actual closing. All we should need at this stage are proof of insurance and updated title report, actual finalization and signature of the legal documents, and payment of the reservation charge during closing. If one of your other funders requires a permit before you can close, you'll still need to complete all of those requirements by the closing deadline, but it's okay if you don't actually close. Instead, we'll just ensure that your project is ready to close as soon as that permit comes through. So here I will pause again and see if anyone has any thoughts or feedback about this due diligence stage. All right, I don't see any questions, so hopefully that means I just did a really good job explaining it. Quick question for the group. Can you hear a weird noise coming from my screen, or can you still hear me okay?
I don't hear any weird noises, Jessica.
Okay,
I don't
good.
either.
Thank you
You're
so
fine.
much. My neighbor started drumming, so I wanted to make sure it wasn't coming through the recording. All right, then we do have just a few more updates for you. And for the first two, I'll go ahead and hand things over to Talia.
Thanks, Jessica. So I'm here with sort of bad news. We are at a point where we have to increase some of our lift charges. Our state economic outlook is not as rosy as it has been in the past, and our agency is just under a lot of pressure to make sure that our programs are self-sufficient, our fee-based programs can continue to support itself without having a general fund ask, which is less and less likely to be funded. And so all of our Lift program is funded through these charges. And in the past, basically throughout the life of the Lift Homeownership program, it's been subsidized by other programs within OHCS, and we can't depend on that moving forward. So we're at a point where we need to increase fees, or we call them charges here. So you'll see the proposal here. The last year, the abbreviated application charge was 1,000. We're increasing it to 1,250. And then the biggest change is that we're increasing the reservation charge from 1.5% to 2%. And then the pre-development loan that didn't exist before, and we just do have a charge associated with that. But again, there's no interest until 12 months, so hopefully it's paid off by then. we're taking other measures to decrease our internal costs so that we are not at a place where we need to increase lift charges again. You know, the Lift Working Group helped us create these templates, which will cut down on a lot of costs for our legal documents. I think moving to this biennial NOFA is really helpful for us, and we're implementing some other internal automation. So we'll be monitoring this, and if we ever can bring them back down again, we will. But for now, we're going to have to go to Housing Stability Council and ask to increase these charges. You can go to the next slide, and then I can pause for any questions. And one other new thing, this is total shift in topic, but new thing for us this year is that in the homeownership development NOFA, it will look a little lengthier this year because we're adding in funds for preservation of manufactured dwelling parks. And so this is $2.5 million that can be used as a grant to a nonprofit or a nonprofit seeking to turn a manufactured dwelling park into a co-op. So purchasing it from the private market and making sure that we can preserve it as naturally occurring affordable housing. And so this guidance will be in the NOFA. Anyone with interest in the past biennial funds, you have until November 30th to apply for the funding that's left in the ORCA through the ORCA, but from now on it will be through the Homeownership Development NOFA, and that will have its own, we'll basically keep all the criteria that the past program had, but it's just administered through our NOFA. That's it for me on that. Any questions on the charges or manufactured dwelling park preservation? Thanks.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Talia. Let's see. So last month we shared with you that we're increasing the maximum developer fee to 14%, but that certain consultant fees will be included in that calculation moving forward. We lifted the language from our rental side of Lyft, which is italicized here on the slide, and we've broken it down a little bit for you. The calculation for the developer fee percentage will include, but is not limited to, developer fees, profit to a project sponsor if that's different from the developer, project management fees to a third-party project manager, fees to any consultants you've paid to support your application to our programs, and standard development consultant fees. We've also been asked how we'll handle scattered sites in the upcoming NOFA. So we've pulled together a policy here. We'll consider scattered sites for a single application if a project can meet the majority of the items on this list, which will be published in the NOFA as well. That's shared financing structure, common development team, unified timeline, shared ownership and long-term management, the same target population, consistent affordability, similar design and amenities, aligned service delivery models, and sites being in the same county or very close if across county lines. Any questions for my part of these additional updates? I guess also if you have questions for Talia, she's still here. All right. Well, then just really quickly, our next steps will be presenting our plan to Housing Stability Council in November and December. We'll spend the next 3 months digging into all the administrative prep work, including issuing a temporary rule change, adopting these practices into our LIFT manual. Then look forward to our series of trainings and the NOFA launch in January. If you want to start preparing early, you can review the 2025 NOFA scoring and application and requirements to get a sense of what our next application and scoring may look like. And you can review the draft schedule and documents that I shared today. We have those posted online. You can also use these if you want to provide any last minute feedback. If you have any questions or thoughts, feel free to reach out to us at ho.development@hcs.oregon.gov. If you'd like to provide any more feedback on the actual policy changes, please email us by close of business on Monday, as we'll have to begin preparing for Housing Stability Council next week. If you have any feedback on the administrative things like which documents go into which section and how many points the tiebreaker is worth, please plan to email those to us by October 31st so that we'll have time to consider that as we build out and finalize the documents. And that's all that I have for you today. If you stay, I'll copy and paste those links into the chat unless Tali has already done it. But otherwise, I just want to say thank you so much for attending and for all the work that everyone's put into our outreach and engagement and our focus groups and our surveys. We really appreciate your partnership in this process and hope that these changes will work well for you all. And thank you again, and I hope you all have a great day.